And joining me now to discuss this some more is Ralph Silva, strategist at Silva Research Network. So when the stress tests were first announced, there seemed to be some level of optimism that they would bring more transparency to the European banking industry as a whole. But as we near the deadline for these results, there seems to be increasing criticism, skepticism, that these tests are simply not stressful enough.
Well, as well there should be. And quite frankly, you don't make somebody run a marathon a week after they broke their leg, and essentially the banking industry is in serious problems, so we have to let them recover before we do it. I love the idea of stress tests. We should do them very often, but we need the banks to recover before we start doing them. And essentially, it's fiscally irresponsible for a government to subject the banks to a test where the majority of the banks are going to fail, because every investor would just leave that country's banking system, and we simply need more funds into the banks, not less.
So what are your expectations of the results? Which banks do you think might fail?
There'll be a couple of sacrificial, cows out there that basically will be allowed to fail the test. We have to see some of that just for some credibility. But generally speaking, the vast majority of them are going to pass with flying colors. We're going to actually see that the banks are doing fairly well. And the other issue here is that we're only testing the big banks. The vast majority of problems are in the small to medium-sized banks, and we haven't even touched those. So just an indication of the banking industry is not really going to be valid just by testing the big banks. But
this is the dilemma, though. I mean, you say the timing wasn't right to test the banks, but at the same time, what were European governments, regulators supposed to do? Because investors were getting jittery, markets were getting nervous. There was a loss of confidence, if you like.
I'm not opposed to doing stress tests. Again, I think they're absolutely right to do it. But the issue is that the regulators have been onto the banks like paint on a wall since this crisis started. The regulators know exactly what all the banks are doing. This is not going to be a surprise to the regulators. If it is, that's going to be a very big shock to me.
Now, Ralph, if I can ask you about U.S. banks, and we've had a raft of earnings out over the past couple of days, an 82% drop in second quarter profit, with the lowest earnings since the fourth quarter in 2008, a disappointing result there for Goldman Sachs.
It is, and it's funny because we're talking about Goldman Sachs in a disappointing way. They still made an absolute fortune. They made a tremendous amount of money. But I'm far more concerned about what this indicates about Goldman's customers. And remember that Goldman customers are the top tier of organizations around the world. They stopped investing, they stopped asking for money, and that's a bigger concern that's probably going to throw us into.
And that's what Lloyd Blankfein said, didn't he? That that it was a very difficult market environment, that they had seen less client activity right across all their businesses.
That's right, and that's the problem. And we're going to start to Morgan Stanley. We're going to see the same thing. They sort of have the same type of clients, so we're going to see a slowdown in that activity, and that means that we're not getting the economy running or moving again, and that's a problem.
So what do these earnings then tell us about investment banking right now?
It's slow. It absolutely slow. Trading activity has slowed down. Companies are not investing. They're not putting money into the markets. They're just holding the money.
And they're not lending either.
And they're not lending. And even if they are lending, they're lending to the wrong types of people.
Ralph Silva, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.